Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Well, I guess, I mean, the book, which is now quite a few years old, has a assessment of, sort of what I think was going on in the world, and then some prescriptions about how the United States should adapt. And essentially, I saw power in the world diffusing. I saw the rise of China. I saw the increasing capabilities of middle powers, which would make American exercise in military force more costly. And so my view was that U.S. grand strategy needed to change, needed to adapt. That's why I recommended the strategy of restraint, which was not original to me. I imbibed many of the ideas from R.V. Sapolsky, who was my predecessor at SSB, and title tells all. So I think my diagnosis of how the world was moving was pretty good. The prescription, what we managed to do was put a policy alternative on the table. But I can't say that I see either the Democrats under President Biden or the Republicans, either, in Trump's first administration or the current administration, really following that route. I just think we managed to interject another position in a U.S. debate that was very, very homogeneous and in many ways self-satisfied. I think, Command of the Commons was about then U.S. Really domination of sea, space, and to some extent air. And with the general diffusion of power, that's become much harder to achieve. So I think space dominance with a big D is probably not achievable. The areas where we have air dominance have shrunk, but I think we still have basically a very high degree of military influence over the commons. And given that that's, the sea, given that that's the principal avenue for international trade, the United States military hegemony serves as a kind of enabler of globalization in the same way that British sea power did. Analogizing to trade, I feel like I'm always walking on sand when I venture into discussions of trade, because it's not really something I've paid a lot of attention to, but my I would say intuition, based on some things I've picked up from colleagues over the years, is that trade kind of finds a way, and it's not an easy space to dominate. Not only is it, lots of countries find ways to make money out of it, but once we've created a safe commons, it's hard for us to then turn that safety on and off without making ourselves the enemy of everybody, right? So it's kind of hard to really put the hammer down unless you're in a war, right? Now, as far as using tariff policy, if I believe that the president really had a pretty well worked out strategy, I'd be more inclined to say, yeah, maybe. What I sense though, is that the president has a kind of impression, right? And the impression is that the free trade system has allowed others to rise. I don't think he has a strong view or a well-researched view on whether they would have risen anyway, maybe a little more slowly, maybe not as far, but it's allowed others to rise. And the Americans have left themselves pretty open as far as trading is concerned, because of a kind of a general concern for, sort of the benefits of free trade for us, but also because of expectations about its benefits for the system. And the benefits for the system in terms of, getting other countries to moderate their behavior and follow our lead, et cetera, et cetera. Those are quite diffuse, right? And many of the those who are advocates of of globalization, particularly the liberal hegemony, it was all about there's going to be this future, this great future where competition is going to wane and we're all going to benefit from that. And my guess is, trying to channel President Trump, as he says, this is a long time coming. He's tapping his watch and basically saying, I want to see some gains that I understand and that he thinks he can explain to his followers. I don't think it's going to work out all that well for the average American. There's some things in that huge bundle that probably we should pay more attention to, friendshoring or onshoring. But on the whole, free trade has been pretty good for the consumer, maybe not for the producer. And, we Americans have a right to ask that question, and we should think about it. But my concern over the president's trade policy is that it's a bit incoherent, even if it's driven by, a concern about, what theorists call relative gains and what it does for our power position in the world. Well, I'll do what academics do. I'll take my right arm and put it around my back and feverishly start patting it. And I wrote an article in Foreign Affairs, maybe it was in the middle of the first Trump administration, in which I dubbed his grand strategy illiberal hegemony, right? I think in the first administration, President Trump came in talking a good game about, his focus on America. But I think he kind of quickly came to, if not understand in some, comprehensive sense, I think he came to a belief or an insight that being the top dog in the world was, kind of fun, as long as you controlled the exchange in every transaction and who won and who lost. So what I think he tried to do was maintain America's preeminence, but to profit from it in a short-term and obvious way. And doing that required already riding roughshod over things like free trade, the United Nations, the views of some of our allies on this, that, and the other, right? So he liked the number one part of it, and he didn't mind wielding power. It was the exchange aspects of it where we're under the old system. It didn't seem like we were, in his terms, winning, right? Others seemed to be winning, or at least getting a draw, right? So I guess as I've tried to wrestle with understanding the current direction of the strategy, I find myself returning to that article and asking, is that still an adequate description of the Trump administration? And I would say yes and no. And the no part is do I need another modifier, those even more illiberal hegemony or even more hegemonic illiberalism? Now, why these terms don't matter very much to most people, but the main point is that he's much more aggressive, much more unconstrained, and in some ways this is one of these bad news, good news things. He's benefiting from the fact that allies when he first was president, they were concerned about threats from abroad and they wanted to keep America on side, but they could get away with kind of, giving a little. They're now more scared of their own environment. So they're much more interested in keeping the president happy. And the president has made clear that he's harder to keep happy, right? So the bargains he's driving are much harder this time around. And they're much more nakedly power relations, right? And I guess I am surprised by that, but I probably shouldn't have been. I think people who understood Trump world better than I did, because I'm not in that world, would have understood that the 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 voices of the Republican voices, even hawkish conservative ones of the past, the American grand strategy in the past, had themselves been some kind of break on the Trump administration in the first term, and now they're just not around, right? He staffed it with loyalists, right? So, he's free to, follow his instincts. So his instincts have not changed very much. But I think the environment in some ways, partly because of his own creation, which is building his own followership to staff the administration, and partly because allies were scared and are more willing to appease him, I think he's actually much less constrained. Uh, I, I guess I think there's two actors who get the credit. One is President Trump and one is Vladimir Putin. And the combination provides quite the impetus to Europeans to develop some capacity to look after themselves. Even given those two causes, I would say that Europeans were still a bit dilatory. I mean, they're doing much better, and I'm glad they are. But and I think both Trump and Putin get some credit for that. But I think they should do even more. And in a weird way, I think they've gotten to the point where I think we're President Trump has to decide what he really wants, right? And my impression is he wants them to do more, but he actually doesn't want them to be very self-reliant. He likes having others on the string, on the dangle, right? And if I were a European right now, I'd be working much harder to really develop truly autonomous capabilities, and not working quite so hard in the hopes that if you kiss Trump's ring often enough and provide enough presence, that you can keep this relationship together. My own view, based not on very good understanding of American politics, is it doesn't really matter what you can get people to say in polls. I think Americans' general interest in foreign policy is much less than it was in the past. I think the foreign policy establishment, what's left of it, is busy trying to scare the hell out of them to get them to be more supportive of this, that, and the other. But I just get the impression, and this is, again, me, East Coast, Northeast, academic, all the rarefied descriptors matter. But, my nose tells me that they're not all that interested, right? And this puts our allies more at the whim of a single leader than I think they've been in many, many decades. And if I were a nation state's leader, I would say to myself, this is not sustainable. And Europe, plus or minus, they have the wealth, they have the population, they have the technology, they have the military building blocks. They could, on the whole, they could look after themselves if they really wanted to. And I think they're buying more insurance than they once did, but from my eye, still not enough. I think our reach exceeded our grasp, and did so in ways that were somewhat predictable. And I think we paid a pretty significant price, right? There's different ways you could kind of describe this. And in some ways, I think, you want to talk to a bigger thinker than I am actually to talk about it. But, my simple explanation at the time was that we were kind of drunk on two things. And one was power. We had way more of the sinews and muscle of power than any other country in the world had ever had. And therefore, the world was open to our activities, not open in a welcoming sense, but just open because we could give lots of things a try. And second, the good guys won the Cold War and the bad guys didn't, right? So the good guys were the liberal democracies and the bad guys were the totalitarians. Everybody famous in these conversations, everyone does the air quotes and mentions end of history and Frank Fukuyama's discussion, right? But we believed that this was the moment to establish the U.S.-led, rules, norms-based, liberal world order, which Eikenberry, in his more candid moments, would admit should be called liberal hegemony, right? And as I describe it in my book, we were active everywhere, right? Shouldn't act everywhere, but active in many places, urging transformation, coercing transformation, bribing transformation. When we faced military pushback, fighting against those who dared to oppose transformation. We treated other idea systems for how to organize politics, especially nationalist ethnic ones, as kind of, brain illnesses left from the 19th century that could be extirpated once and for all. Whatever, nostrum liberalism prescribed, regardless of, the creative destruction aspects of it, including spreading the market everywhere as quickly as possible and opening up everything you could open up and deregulating America and opening the internet, all this stuff, right? There was, this sounds strange coming from me because it's not what I do, but there was a deficit of conservatism, small c conservatism. And what I mean by that is liberals needed to take a breath and consolidate, right? Consolidate gains before jumping off to a new set of adventures. And we didn't understand, because I count myself in that group, we didn't understand the fragility of the moment. We thought that the moment was etched in stone, right? And also didn't see, as the United States began to get into misadventures that cost us dearly, and promoted illiberalism at home. You can't go anywhere without going through a security detector. And this is not America, right? We didn't realize and stop and think what it was doing to us, right? And so that's what I think was the big error.